Well, in true Gen Y style, I've got my speech on my iPhone. No, actually, I'm going to do something very hard for this generation and turn my phone off. Yeah, big call. All right. So Gen Y, what is it? Well, generally accepted people born 1982 to 2000, age 12 to 30 today. 4.5 million Gen Ys in Australia today. So what is Gen Y? What do people say about them? Impatient, disloyal, demanding, quoted an article in the Herald Sun called Why Bosses Hate Gen Y. Why would anyone hire a Gen Y, they said? Because you've got no other choice. Well, in the face of stereotypes like this, you can understand perhaps why I'm not the biggest fan of generational stereotypes, and certainly wasn't when I started going into this. I dug into a little bit of the history, so, where did this all come from? Baby boomers, clear enough, people born post-war. There was literally a boom of babies. It's called the pig and the python. You can see the stack in the population demographic. And then people started to get a little confused, the generationologers, if we call them. The next generation they called X for unknown, because they couldn't work them out. And then after Gen X, they were like, well, what's the next generation? What comes after X? Y. Well, I have to say, that doesn't fill you with faith in the idea of generational systems and typologies. But I spent a bit of time thinking about it, and I've been playing a little bit with words, and in particular with a theory called nominative determinism, which is the theory that names determine attributes and that people grow to become representative of their names. And there are some fantastic examples of this, and these are real people, believe me. Thomas Crapper, the inventor of the flushing toilet. Sue Yu, a trial lawyer in LA. Amy Freeze, a weather presenter in a very cold part of America. Bishop Bishop, Justice Judge, and my personal favourite, and this one I checked a million times because I couldn't believe it was true, the leading vasectomy practitioner in America, Dr. Richard Chop. Yep. And I must admit, I have a bit of a vested interest in nominative determinism. I like the theory. My name is Victor, and I hope it plays out. But I started thinking about it, and I said, well, what determines Generation Y? What defines us? And in truth, what I came to at the end of all my searching is that we ask the question why. W-H-Y. And I think the difference perhaps between Gen Y and the baby boomers, who both questioned existing status quo, is that we listen to the answers sometimes, if they're well explained. So baby boomers were in many ways defined in opposition to what they stood against, the massive protests against the Vietnam War, the hippie movement that rejected all the status quo. A great survey from 1974 showed that 40% of baby boomers thought their lives were worse because of their parents. Right? Now, Gen Y is totally different. One of the biggest stereotypes is that, and it's true, 25% of under 30s in Australia still live at home. And 90% of us have fantastic relationships with our parents. So the thing is, with Gen Y, we ask the questions, but we're actually interested in listening to the answers. So what I'm going to do in this talk is talk you through what I think are the 3 defining questions that Gen Ys ask, and then offer some suggestions for organisations and how that actually goes through. And if you wonder, why should you care about any of this? Well, I'd go back to the Herald Sun's joke at the start, because you have no other choice. The next 20 years, the 4.5 million Gen Ys are going to be the future employees of your organisation. They're there already, but you're not going to be able to get past them. Just like any trend, you have to grab it by the horns and change, or get left behind. So what do I think the 3 questions are? First, why am I doing this? Why do things have to be this way? And why can't I cite Wikipedia? So let's talk about the first one. Why am I doing this? Or as most Gen Ys would say it, why am I doing this? And I think this leads to the stereotype a lot of had of laziness on one side. Because some Gen Ys ask this question, why am I doing this when it comes to work? And they decide that no work is ever going to satisfy them in any serious way, and work becomes a small amount. But for the other half, the question, why am I doing this, is about recognising that Gen Y wants to be doing rewarding and stimulating work right from day one. It's what we want. And if we're not getting that in one organisation, we'll go find it in another. And if we can't find it there, a lot of people in my generation will just go start their own business or start their own organisation to start bringing about that change from an early level. So when we think about why am I doing this, I just thought I'd share my path a little bit. I studied music after high school, worked as a musician, then went and studied engineering as an excuse so I could debate around the world. Started working as a management consultant. I'll be at McKinsey for 1 year before I rush off to go study public policy all over the shop. But to me, This is a very serious set of decisions that at every point looked around and said, well, what's the most exciting, most engaging, most meaningful thing I could be doing at the time? I'm going to go do that. To my parents' generation, this is like, you have no idea what the hell's going on. You can't commit to anything. You have no loyalty to any organization. Now, luckily that's not my parents, but that's most people in that view. And I think that generational response to this is interesting. And it was very interesting to me to hear this morning when Simon McCohen talked about tri-sector leadership, right? And the idea that there might actually be some benefits to people taking these convoluted paths that take them across different sectors, business, government, non-profit, and actually learn how to work in there. But so in continuing on this question of why am I doing this, I think one thing to understand is Gen Y doesn't see work as an end in and of itself. We don't work for our own sake, for its own sake. There's probably two reasons behind this. One, that we grew up with a lot of prosperity as a generation. We're the richest, most educated generation in history. And we've seen that wealth alone doesn't bring happiness. That the aim of owning the house and the car isn't actually enough to live a meaningful existence. The second is that we've seen loyalty to business unrewarded. The people in our parents' generation who spent 10, 20 years giving loyalty to companies, being retrenched in downturns and laid off. So work is not the goal that it once was. And the reason that we ask for more is that we've been raised being told that we were great. Everyone, there's a theme earlier in education, we're mollycoddled in education, told we could succeed. I got more ribbons for participation than for success in anything that I ever did. Though, anyway. And I think the important thing here to recognize is that we've been told growing up that we should be able to do whatever we want, that there should be a better thing for us to be doing. And we actually believe that. And that's a little bit arrogant, and it's a little bit based in fantasy and not in fact, but it shapes the way that we think and shapes the way that we look at work. And I think the ideal way of thinking of a job for Gen Y is that a job should be like being a paid volunteer. That the job that we're looking for is something that's actually so exciting and so interesting that we do it for fun. And that's great, because there was a question this morning, what's going to happen when robots do all the boring jobs and all the jobs, what's going to be left? Well, the answer is volunteering is exactly what we want to do. We want to be passionate hobbyists in our job right now. So the second question is, why do things have to be this way? Gen Y does challenge the status quo. We might have been born entitled in a time of peace. In fact, the late 80s to early 90s were so peaceful that noted historian Francis Fukuyama termed it the end of history. There was never going to be war ever again. But we've grown up and matured in a world that was challenging and complicated, where the status quo was beginning to show cracks and fail. September 11 showed the end of the international order as we understood it, and the loss of American power and the inability to resolve conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan, or indeed create. We've also seen the failure of individualism and capitalism and the global financial crisis in our continued inability as a society to actually make an impact to stop the challenge, stop the threat of climate change. These are real issues for us because we have to grow up into the future of climate change, if that's something we don't do anything about. And we're aware and open-eyed to those threats. But this sets up a little bit of a paradox, right? That on one hand, we're full of self-belief, and on the other hand, we're aware of threats. And out of that comes this community-mindedness that recognizes, in order to achieve what we want for ourselves, community is a really big part of it. And I think that's important to understand. There are many questions for Gen Y when it comes to society and why things are the way they are, that to us are staggering, that are still issues. I mean, why is it still an issue in some companies that women find it difficult to advance to ranks at the top? There should be no doubt that men and women are equal in society and in business. That's accepted. That's status quo for us. We don't understand why it's not the same way throughout business as a whole. Look at the latest poll that came out 2 days ago about gay marriage. Why is this controversial? Why is this not legal in this country? To Gen Y, over 80% think of it as a complete non-issue and support it absolutely. So, I'm right here, right now, off topic, challenge you to think about your responses to those questions. But a big thing about Gen Y as well is that we think that we can act now about it. Captain Planet, the Planeteers, kids changing the world. And you see it in organisations like Oak Tree Foundation, the Australian Youth Climate Change Coalition, the left-right think tank, change.org. The difference is here that youth activists in Gen Y today actually are willing to engage with the system and shape it. It's a questioning of why things that don't have to be this way without rejecting the entire order and status quo. And I think that's a powerful understanding to have. In fact, Simon talked about it this morning when he said that we need every party, government, private sector and public sector, to do their part in solving the problems of the world. And I think that's exactly hitting the nail on the head. For Gen Y, the sole purpose of business cannot be about profit. There has to be a purpose behind it if we're actually going to change the status quo. So the third point I want to talk about is, why can't I cite Wikipedia? And I use this as a trite example to open a discussion about the internet and how it shapes knowledge. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that discussed today. But as an interesting aside, Nature ran a little study in 2005, a respected science journal, and they analysed scientific articles on Wikipedia and on Nature, and they found that there were equivalent numbers of serious errors in both Wikipedia and Britannica. Britannica was obviously furious about this and published a long series of responses which Nature responded to comprehensively. It was quite impressive. But anyway, the point of this is that it's not a revelation to us. This morning when Professor Dennett said the internet, is shaping our world, what would happen if we switched it off? There's no exit strategy. Well, to Gen Y, that's not a revelation, that's life. What is life without the internet? I mean, switching it off, you might as well end life then and there. And the fact that we're on the fast road to a technological future isn't a concern. That's the future, and that's where we're going. And, I've earned the nickname around work of Google Boy, because anytime an issue comes up and there's a discussion about something, I just Google it, find out. Mum calls me a cyborg plugged in. So my answer now to Ray Kurzweil's question of, are your implants a part of you? Well, yeah, Google is part of me right now. And I think it's a big part of our generation. And the ubiquity of knowledge changes the way that we relate to learning and changes the importance of information. For our generation growing up, knowledge has never been difficult to find. Any question you had, any fact you needed to know, you could at least find something on that on the internet. The challenge now is actually understanding what's important and what wisdom is. And the other part of how we relate to the internet is about constant feedback. Gen Y, more than any other generation, lives our life out on the internet and Facebook, not MySpace anymore, that died. But it's a world of constant feedback where we put forward our ideas and our opinions and get instant responses on what we're wearing, what we're thinking, what we're doing, and get that feedback. And that's a very important part of how and why we think. So the three questions: why am I doing this? Why do things have to be this way? And why can't I cite Wikipedia? What does that actually mean for organisations? Well, firstly, before I get into my answers, I challenge you to think, how can you answer those questions? And see my answers to that, I guess, in these solutions. So firstly, be able to articulate your purpose. While every generation will have its Gordon Geckos who are interested in profit alone, Gen Y, more than any generation before, is seeking purpose. And I think you need to be able to express and articulate your organisation, your unit, your division. Why are you there? What do you do beyond generating profit? Profit's essential, but what is the purpose and how do you make the world better? Because that's the question and that's the essential meaning that many high-performing Gen Ys are looking forward to. And it can't just be greenwashing, right? It's not just, oh yeah, we've published this little contribution that we make to a green fund. It has to be real. Because Gen Y is incredibly good at sniffing out hypocrisy. And I don't necessarily think it's inbuilt bullshit detectors. It's the fact that the internet brings things to light. WikiLeaks brings everything to light as it comes about. So being able to live and articulate your purpose, I think, is critical for creating an organisation that Gen Ys actually want to be part of. The second thing is supporting our life trajectory. As I mentioned before, work is not an end in and of itself for Gen Y. And having a balanced and meaningful life outside that is critical. And so supporting employees in that is crucial to having happy people who'll stay at the organisation. And that's things as simple as recognising, can you have flexible time? Do you need people to be in the office from 9 to 5? Or can you actually assess people on performance, set specific times when people have to be there and allow them the flexibility to take time off when they need to? So think about having job opportunities within your organisation. If you can provide development opportunities and paths to grow within your business, then Gen Ys won't have the same need to leave to pursue their interests otherwise. And the third thing is supporting Gen Y to take risks, because there was a lot that was discussed in the earlier sessions that rings true. We've been mollycoddled. The education system probably hasn't prepared us as well as it should have for the working world out there. But all is not lost. We're not without hope. Gen Ys are good at teamwork, and we're much more open to taking risks. And I think an organisation that supports Gen Ys in having the freedom to take risks and allows us to learn from the failures without giving up just that little bit too much rope to hang ourselves is critical to actually creating organisations that will capture the benefit. And so why do I think you should care about this? What's the point? Well, firstly, if you can create an organisation that has purpose and meaning, that supports people in their life trajectory and gives them meaningful development opportunities and supports them in learning, that's what it's going to take to attract high-achieving people of any generation. And that's something I got really strongly from this session so far today. It's just that Gen Y is calling for it the loudest. But the second part is that if you can do these things, you've got the formula for innovation. Because if you have people who are willing to rapidly iterate through the internet and prototype and take risks, people who care, and people who are willing to challenge the status quo, that's what you need for innovation. So yeah, there are a lot of negative stereotypes about Gen Y, but I'm an optimist, and I think Gen Y is something and a resource and a way of thinking that you can harness for success. Thank you.